Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to everybody on this Audit and Risk Committee meeting. I declare the meeting open and a call for apologies.
We have apologies from Councillors Ketu, Brannigan and Tokumaru. Councillor Tokumaru is on parental leave.
Thank you. Can I have a mover for those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Sand. Seconded, Councillor David. All those in favour, please say aye.
Just noting that Councillor Brannigan is expected.
He's just for lateness.
Yes.
Thank you. With that slight amendment, mover and seconder happy. Right, next item on the agenda is public participation.
Speaking to 7.2 Infrastructure Development Activity Update and 7.3 Infrastructure Operations Activity Update is Charles Rudd. And speaking to 7.5 7 months report, Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenditure is Sue Ann and Brett Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. If you'd like to come to the podium or table, thank you very much.
Yeah. Who, how, what, where, when, and why. Failures in accountability, credibility, integrity, and transparency. Failures in planning, organising, leading, controlling, and communication. Failures in manpower, machinery, and materials. Relative to the above in regards to more unforeseen costs to the ratepayers and others. In hindsight, yesterday can be seen with the words, "I told you so," but one never took at that time, and that equates to a failure. I've said things in the past that have been totally ignored. Should never have been ignored. That's why I got water problems and all sorts of stuff. Page 15, 3, 2, 3. Focus for the next month. That's on that page. Complete planning and design of the localised pre-02 NL stormwater, whatever that word means, it's a new word for me, method. And page 23, Queen Tokumaru Road of Tokumaru water and stormwater upgrade. To the point set as above. That's when I'm talking about failures. Is the Hotanea District Council going to apply for belated resource consent to the Queen Street stormwater drainage system? That's a question. Is the cart before the horse? Question. Why is it that HDC bulldozing ahead with its effect relative to the Tairaka growth area when the HDC has not completed the proposed plan change for submission hearing process yet? That hasn't been done. And yet everything's been plowed ahead, doing this and then. They haven't had the submissions. The District Council's words in that document was, have your say. So where does the due care, due diligence, fiduciary understanding of the due process and natural justice stand here? Those are the questions I'm asking.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Rudd. Are there any questions from members? Thank you. We can have Sue Ann and Brett Russell, please. I assume it's a joint presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Not sure what the correct address is, but hello, Chairperson and councillors. My presentation is a wee bit broader than first said. Okay, the first thing I'd like to talk about is the river loop on page 13 of the agenda. It's really good to have celebration down there. That's really great. It's good to see the children's playground reinstated. The one thing that I did have a criticism on the advertising, and I'll take up on Christina Patton's, some of her comments. There's no Foxton in there, and it is Foxton. So I was a little bit disappointed to see that it is, although it's a Manawatu River, it is at the Foxton Loop that the celebration is taking place. I'm not quite sure why our name's getting confused. The other point is in 3.14, and it's got their residual funding from 3.86 million will be utilised to complete the park. I find this quite vague and confusing because there's actually no project accounting. So there's no accounting for the funds for each, for the budget for each of these projects. So you can't tell what's been spent by who and which portion of it the council has contributed. And it says there the residual. Well, there's no way of seeing or finding out what that is or how that came to be. I got a bit confused with the PDU. It's a Progressive Development Fund, so I don't know what PDU means. I'm assuming it's just a spelling error. And then I wanted to comment on the River Loop graph. The graph itself, if you were in business, will tell you nothing. There is no backup information to tell you anything about that. It's just a couple of colours and a couple of squares with a range of numbers, and there is no information backing that up whatsoever, apart from the fact we know that we got 3.86 million, and the council's contributed something. But apart from that, there is no identifying anything on that graph, which I think is really poor reporting. There's project accounting for Foxton Loop, Foxton Beach Lifesavers, for the Vale Lutu projects. They've all generated funds outside the HDC and raised by groups who lose control of that funding once it's given to the HDC, and they deserve better reporting. The system should have a detailed project account for each fund, so targets can be measured with budget and project progress. So transparency is available to the group council and the groups that have raised these funds, and to the public. So that each project can see whether funds given to them have been spent and how much has been contributed by the HDC. At the moment it's very murky for fund providers and groups and the general public and also the council members to know the detail of these projects. There's just a quick comment on 3.2 on page 14 on Gladstone Green, and I'm only commenting on that briefly because I just wanted to say that in your last agenda, Charles Rudd was misquoted. He was trying to point out that you did say that the Green was going to be self-sufficient in terms of stormwater, and at the same time you were telling us about the pipes going under the highway. He was trying to point that out, and it was not reported in the last agenda for overflow, which I was a bit disappointed about. Sorry, then I ran out of time for my typing, I have to do my handwriting. On page 50, you've got comments on development contributions, which I find really misleading, seeing as you don't have any. So you say here, Operating revenue should be equal or more than operating expenditure. Operating revenue excludes vested assets, development contributions, asset revaluation gains, and gains on derivatives. I think that's a bit misleading because you don't have any. So I'm not quite sure why it's in there.
That's a direct quote from the accounting regulations that define how we show the revenue.
Okay, again, I find it misleading because you don't have any, and you could say you don't have any or clear up that fact because it makes the readers believe there are some. Also, the graph on page 52, capital expenditure summary. Now, I understand why the capital expenditure is under your budget because the funding for the loop was categorised incorrectly. And it should be in an OPEX graph. However, there is no OPEX graph to have a look at for the spending on the river loop. The other point is, has the budget been corrected? Has the budget been corrected to reflect that the operating and the capital expenditure was confused or mixed up? So that when people look at this, they can see the correct comparisons.
With the budget, unfortunately, the Local Government Act doesn't allow council to amend its annual plan, and that's what we're actually required by legislation to report against. You are required under legislation to report against your annual plan. So when the annual plan was constructed, it was believed that this could be treated as capital expenditure.
Okay.
So when the work was begun and detailed analysis was deemed, it couldn't be deemed capital expenditure.
Okay, that's actually a reporting error. Shouldn't that then be corrected?
You can't amend, as I said, you can't amend your budget because the budget, there is no ability for council to amend the annual plan.
You said the annual plan, but the budget is separate to the annual plan.
No, the budget is set through the annual plan process.
But surely there'd be an opportunity for council to provide supplementary information that would be helpful to the reader.
That's a decision for council. That's part of your submission then, is that you actually wish a revised budget to be, so we end up with two budgets, a revised budget and an annual plan budget. That's what you're asking for.
Well, that would be helpful to the understanding of where the money comes from and where it goes to.
Yeah. And then the other comment I have.
Sorry, may I just make one quick comment? In regards to, so what we will do for the next month is in the forecast that we will provide, and I think we indicated it in the capital summary there, is the next time you look at the report, the forecast line, there'll be a forecast line in those capital budgets, and that will indicate then when we're spending less because of that fact in regards to Foxton. And then when you look at the operating summary, we will also be forecasting to spend more in that space, and that will indicate. So rather than adjusting a budget, we will look to adjust the forecast so that you'll have that view visible to you where it's changed effectively.
Thank you.
Okay. The other question was on 28 Durham Street. I'm not quite sure why we're purchasing land, why it's strategic. We're selling land, and we've sold land in Durham Street, from my understanding. And for 3 months, it's quite a high cost gone into the purchase of properties. So I don't understand that. I wouldn't mind knowing a bit more about that, if that can be explained. And I did have a comment. Another comment, but I might just leave that. So my recommendations were to adopt a project accounting approach in your management information system, so that people raising funds for these specific projects can actually monitor and see what's going on with their particular project. Errors and corrections that might be needed in the agenda are things like that I've mentioned, the misquote of Charles, the contributions which you've explained, PDU, which I still don't understand what that is, and as you've said, the correction of the of your forgot what we called it. Lost words. So that was all I had to say in regards to that.
Could I just add that
You're actually out of time. You've had your more than 10 minutes between you. It's 5 minutes each.
okay, just
But
want
we
to
did have just interrupt news at the time.
say very quickly that the whole of Fox are looking forward to the besting reopening of the Manawatu Lake Reserve. My understanding is that the dredging should have gone to a depth of 1.5 metres, and in actual fact has only gone to a depth of 0.5, half a metre. And I'm wondering if Councillor Allen is aware of that, and if he's got any comments.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's my understanding, and if that's the case, then it's not really in expectations of the outcome the public are looking for. Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Just a question through you to Brent or one of the relevant officers if they would like to comment on that.
The dredging depth was a function of the time we had in the river before the fish spawning season took hold, and that was a consent condition. Our ability to remove the river silt. The 500 millimetres that's been quoted is the depth at low tide. At high tide, it's at least 1.5 metres, if not more. It's certainly over my head in certain parts.
Thank you for your submission, and I just want to clarify that these financials are actually an exception report. There is actually more detailed reporting every quarter. So that's the way the council actually reports. It's detailed every quarter and a monthly exception report. But thank you for your comments. I'm sure staff will take those on board.
I do read those, and I still find the attached information lacking.
Thank you. Right, so if we go back to our agenda, I'm not aware of any late items. Declaration of conflicts of interest for items on the agenda. Confirmation of the minutes.
Chair. Just in relation to the declarations of interest, again, just repeating, consistent with previous meetings, however, declaring conflict of interest in relation to Taraika, as I live in close proximity to that development. There's no decisions on the council papers today relating to that, but I just wanted to make that known.
So through you, Chair, just for process in future, you only have to declare it once in an instance like that. When there is a decision that needs to be made, you declare it at that in that meeting. So your conflict of interest has already been identified and it's noted in the minutes. You don't have to do it at every meeting.
I pushed my button, Mr. Chair, after you said about the minutes, confirmation minutes, so I don't want to jump anybody else's declaration of it. I want to talk for a minute, or talk to the minutes. So I had a few minutes talk to the Mayor prior to the council meeting, just around the commentary around the submission by Mr. Eadie last Finance Audit and Risk meeting, where you'll recall he asked a couple of questions, and one was about the loss of on sale of the Rose Street property, and there was this awful pregnant pause, which I stepped into and tried to give some clarity, but I don't know whether this is the forum to do that, because we're talking about minutes, and I don't know whether I'm going to bounce between this forum or the council forum, because what I'm wanting to get is just a indication that we can have this brought out of committee, that decision that was made, given that the land has been sold and finalised, and then some finality, some transparency can be put out to the public, so we have some comfort within the community when questions like last meeting, it didn't help the situation.
Thank you, Councillor Wayne. I actually have also got that on the agenda, but I was actually going to deal with that under the financial report under the property acquisition, so we can have a little bit of a discussion about future reporting under the property acquisitions and the funding of the property acquisitions, and we'll just deal with. I think we'll deal with it then if that's okay with you. We'll have that discussion.
Yeah. But can we just flag? Is it possible to now bring that out? Because it's not in committee in this forum, it's in the council, the full council meetings that it went into. Can we have that a report, bring it out of committee and just finalise it?
Can I suggest we deal with that discussion when we deal with the financial issues? I think we might have a solution for you. So you're happy to then move the minutes, are you, Councillor Wayne?
I'm happy to move.
Do I have a seconder? Oh, thank you, Member Jackson. Any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favour, please say aye. Against carried. I'm not aware of any announcements. Our first report is Community Facilities Update. Thank you. Who's leading the discussion?
Good afternoon, elected members of the public and staff. I will take the report largely as read as it relates purely to the hydroslide project. I guess from my point of view, just drawing attention to the fact that unfortunately the opening of the hydroslide has been delayed. You will recall that we would have hoped to have had the hydroslide open this week, in fact, and instead it is now opening on Sunday the 7th of March, which is proudly in support of Children's Day, which we're really excited about. However, equally disappointed that we have essentially run over by 2 weeks to what we had hoped. In doing so, we've outlined within the report that there are some additional risk controls that we are having to put in place, particularly in the final week, and we are amping up our communication almost to a daily. In fact, both Brent and I have been over there today, basis ensuring that everything is running smoothly. We are both confident. However, I do want to acknowledge and apologise that we have not met the original date that we had advised. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions of Nikki in terms of the report?
Can I please be the first to go down the hydroslide?
You spoke too quietly, Councillor Jennings. I couldn't quite actually hear that. I'm not sure if you want to repeat it either. Right, see, on that note, I understand that you want to move the recommendation back on page 70, Mr. Jennings. Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Do I have a seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Joe. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, team. Infrastructure Development Activity Update. Pages 9 to 21. You don't have a support crew today.
No, Mr. Chairman, they're all busy working on these important projects in this fine weather, okay, while the sun shines. Happy to take the report as read. It's a continuing story over the last few months of how we're building a good head of steam in regards to delivery of these projects. I don't have any further to add. I think most of what's in the report is self-explanatory. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the officer? None? Must be a good report then. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Waiting motion.
Sorry, Councillor David.
I'll just use this public forum to address the issue. There's clearly been some controversy around the timing of the opening, and Brett, you did share some very important information with us around the timing, recognising that council's only a player on the day, they're not the lead agency, but I just wonder if you could identify the key issues and the reasons for staying with the opening date on Saturday.
Thank you, Councillor Allen, and through the Chairman. I just want to correct perhaps a little bit of misinformation. Saturday is the Manawatu River Festival, which would typically be held in Palmerston North around this time of year, which is a celebration of the Manawatu River and managed and run by the Manawatu River Leaders Forum. This year, that hosting right was granted to Foxton because of the great progress being made by the team of this council and our partners in widening the river loop and improving the water quality. It was never about opening the park, it was about a celebration of two things. One was the completion of the works in the river and regaining that as a natural asset for the community, but also to celebrate the great progress we've made with the park. Park in my paper was always going to have a few extra items to be done towards the end. We certainly have our fingers crossed that the grass will have grown in time. Mother Nature has sort of intervened in that, and weather like this is not good and conducive for grass growing. All that aside, we have made a commitment with the River Leaders Forum to host the event, and whilst we're in COVID level 1, we can host the event. The weather couldn't be better for an outdoor event. We are able to utilise the park as it stands. All of the footpaths are now complete and walkable. The embankment is fully planted and open. There is quite a good sold of grass there, and all the bare patches will be covered over on the weekend with that rubber matting you often see at events. And we'll erect a few tents and marquees and a few things. That will just help with, precluding people from walking on the bare patches. But the hero is the water. And everything we're doing on Saturday is about acknowledging the rebirth of the river loop itself, the hero being the Manawatu River. There'll be a chance for us to celebrate opening of the park when we're completed later in the year, which should be around sort of May, early June, once we've got the final planting in, the barbecues, the street lights, and we've completed all the works along the adjacent roading areas. But for the time being, more than happy to see you all there to celebrate what has been a big effort to get that river loop and get all the weeds out, get it dug out, get it looking good, and celebrate the return of the water quality in that area. It will be a great event.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions, comments on the report? Do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 9? Thank you, Councillor David. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Todd. Any discussion on the resolution? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Next item, page 21, our infrastructure operations update. Thank you. Bill, the floor is yours.
Yeah, one update I'd like to make is just with the Harfnur Alliance. Down have been successful in recruiting a new Alliance Director who will start in April. Mr. David York is the man. He's got plenty of experience. In fact, in 1983 he started with the Harfnur County Council as a water engineer and went through into the Harfnur District Council where he finished in 93. So 10 years experience with this council. He knows a lot of what is out there, why it's there, and a lot of the reasoning, so some good history. Since then, he spent time working with a couple of consultants, was branch manager for a couple of them in Palmerston North. He spent time working for Manawatu District Council and for the last 3 years he's been infrastructure manager at Palmerston North Airport, who were doing an expansion phase. With COVID, that's sort of been put on hold, so we've managed to grab him to come into this role. So that's a good bit of news, so looking forward to him starting. Apart from that, happy to take the report as read.
Are there any comments? Any?
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, just in reference to the Tokumaru Wastewater Discharge Consent Update, I noticed that there was the TWWWP meeting held in December, and there were a number of recommendations or outcomes that came out of that, and I just wondered whether any of those had been implemented.
Yeah, so this is a meeting that takes place every 6 months, and so far what we have done, we have been investigating the inflows. So Tokumaru and Shannon inflows, I&I has been getting dealt with. There's been some discussion around independent facilitator, but we haven't selected one yet. PNCC, we've been having regular discussions with them around things, but we haven't caught up with them about this particular item. E. coli sampling is being done as part of the consent conditions, and we will test those as part of that. And the options for beneficial reuse of wastewater are part of the bigger picture for the long-term solution, which is being investigated as part of the next consent. So we've got a short-term consent to continue to do what we're doing, but that bigger picture is still being developed. So probably won't have anything to go back to their next meeting for that. It's a longer-term project.
Are there any other questions, Councillor Todd?
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, just on page 33, under the drinking water supply for January, under chemicals for Foxton Beach, Levin and Shannon, you've got NA. Can you just enlighten me on that, please?
I'll have to talk to our colleagues at the Alliance, so I'm not 100% sure.
Am I allowed to ask another question? In the Alliance report, Kevin, there's reference to water reticulation renewals, and there were 4 bursts in a week. Were they all concentrated in the same area, or was that spread across the district? And obviously, I suppose what I'm trying to understand is what caused those bursts. Was it the condition of the pipes, or was it just normal wear and tear?
All of those bursts were in Balance Street, so from the Shannon Domain heading back towards the hills, in that section there, there's an old AC pipe that has reached the end of its life. It's been on our Forward Works program for a while, has been identified as needing replacement, but the bursts mean that we're going to bring it forward a bit and shuffle some around. So sometimes when a pipe bursts and the pressure goes out and then you fix it and you put the pressure back on, it can cause impacts on other areas of the pipe, and you can get a series of bursts in a row, which is possibly what's happened in this case. But it's an old pipe that was identified for replacement already.
Any other questions? I've actually got, just to prove that engineers can speak in technical terms as well as bean counters, in terms of their accountanese. Just in terms of the chemical compliance requirements on page 33, we've got some 3-letter acronyms. It would actually be nice to actually have those in English and what they actually mean to the lay person. It doesn't mean, apart from I assume green means it's okay, but what's the maximum level that we're allowed, and what do they actually really mean, considering what's happening down in just slightly north of Dunedin with their water as well, and just in future. Or unless you want to explain, if you can explain them now, that would be appreciated.
I'll make sure that they're explained properly next time.
Can I just follow up the question from Mayor Burney around the Balance Street pipe? So you said it was already on the Forward Works program. Yeah, and you might not be able to answer this today, but do you know whether it was on the Forward Works program because it had been specifically condition assessed through CCTV or some other method, or was it on there just because it was assessed to be a certain age, certain material?
You can't CCTV water supply pipes, only wastewater and stormwater. So largely it's based on condition. If we've had to go work on it, we'll record the type of material, and sometimes if there has been a burst, we'll cut a slice out and get it looked at and tested. So it's a number of things, but definitely age. Some of the ones in Shannon, we're not 100% sure exactly when it was installed. We know they're more than 40 years old, but some of the earlier asset records don't have a specific date. But we knew that it's old. We knew that it was having problems and leaks. So Shannon has quite a leakage issue, which we've identified, and so we're doing quite a bit of work on trying to track down those leaks in Shannon at the moment. We've mentioned bands before, and we have to increase it to band B. In part of that process now, trying to track those leaks and fix them.
Are there any other questions? Welcome, Councillor Ross. Yeah, it was received, thank you. No further questions. Can we then go back to page 21? Can I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Burney. Seconded, Member Bryan. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Customer and strategy update. Mr. McCorkindale, aptly supported.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. Do just want to take a couple of moments to identify a couple of new things that we've added into this report, but before I do that, do just want to draw your attention to a correction that I'd like to apologise for, and that is on page 40, and it's the description below the chart which is headed Building Consents Issued, and it's the description below, it refers to the value of building consents in the first line and also in the second line, and should just relate to the total building consents issued, or the number of building consents issued. The couple of changes that we've made to this report, I guess, pick up on the requests that have been coming through from the committee around starting to see some more information, tracking around how we're going, particularly in the growth environment. And whilst we are still working on, and as I cover in paragraph 4.1 around how we might do that, and we do want to come back to council, particularly as we look at the overlaps between that and what the growth councils are required to do in terms of housing and business development capacity assessment reports. We do believe that this is a similar report that we should probably be producing, and want to just look at the overlaps and make sure we're both giving the information which council are interested in, but also serving that purpose there. So it's a work in progress. But two additional items that we did add in are the 6th bullet point under 5.1 and also the 6th bullet point under 5.2. We've tried to pick up on, again, some of the comments from the committee and look at how we're tracking against those projections. Now, the assumptions or the projections we've used have been the ones that council has most recently adopted, being for the long-term plan that we're working on at the moment. And what we've tried to look at is how we're tracking at the moment, both in terms of new dwellings that are being built, as well as the land supply, so when titles are coming in. And we use, in 5.2, we talk about that the section 224, so when a title is actually created, and often there's a lag between the title being created and the house being built. So we've looked at what sort of land supply we would need 2 years out, and looked at how we're tracking against there. So overall, things are, I think, tracking along nicely. We are continuing to see the growth that the district's experiencing, and I'll ask Vi just to speak to one of the new items that she added in relation to the parking information.
Thanks, David. Kia ora koutou. So so first what David said, the addition that I've made to the parking information is the final graph, so on page 45. The committee might recognise that there is an additional bar that we've added to there, titled 2020/21 Less Court. So the significance of putting that in there is the green bar that we've been reporting up till now includes the value of tickets that we have issued, but we don't necessarily collect all of the money for the value of tickets issued. So what the yellow bar shows is actually 70 days down the track when we've done the processing for an infringement. It then goes to court for collections. This yellow graph reflects the amount that we've collected, not the amount of the value of tickets.
Are there any questions of either David or Vi? Bernie?
Vi, I have a question around the value of the parking tickets, therefore, that we are cancelling in terms of that. That includes infringements as well as ordinary parking tickets?
Yes, all the infringement tickets are the same, but yes, they do. We have a parking cancellation guidelines, which is the policy of sorts that gives a guideline to staff around when we can and can't cancel infringement tickets.
Any other questions? No other questions? Therefore, I go back to page 37. Can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 37? Thank you, Councillor David. Seconded, Councillor Sam. No further any discussion on the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Financial report, 7-month exception report. Which one of my two learned friends on my right is presenting this one? Bit of cheek there.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. I guess I'll take the report as read, but I just wanted to note a couple of points, and those would be that on page 49, what we've tried to do is include a little bit more of an executive summary to give everyone a bit of a view of what's happening at a high level. In regards to the report as well, and this relates to some of the conversation and public participation as well, is we've given a summary at this stage at the bottom of page 49 of the grant funding that we have received, but what you'll look to see for the next report is a bit more of a summary on how that's been spent. So that should satisfy, hopefully, some of the questions that came through public participation. And as well, in regards to forecasting, we will look for this next month to include a bit of a summary of where we're looking to end up from a capital spending perspective at each activity. So on those activity graphs, you see a forecast line that hopefully will be a bit more reflective of where we think we'll end up for the year. And as well on the operating side, you'll see that will come along in terms of a bit more refinement of that forecast for the year. So happy to take any questions.
It was actually just a clarification actually on the capital spend graphs that are included, because presumably that is spend to date, not necessarily commitments, because there's obviously some commitments that have been made going forward. So will the additional reporting that you're talking about indicate where there's essentially those commitments have been made or not? Is that?
It should definitely, from the perspective that the forecast should indicate both the commitments that we've made and also indications that we have of the best guess, I wouldn't say guess, but best estimate that we have of where we're going to end up at the end of June. Yeah.
I thought the weather forecast was always the best guess. The weather forecast, not the financial forecast. Can I just go back, just if I forgot, no. Look at page 55 in the properties. This is something I would be keen to see a more detailed report on, and looking to the Chief Executive here in terms of the discussion, the issue that Wayne Bishop raised about the sale and purchase of properties that have occurred in this financial year, and probably a bit more reporting as to some of the rationale for the acquisition, the funding. Particularly, we've had a property purchases and sale during the financial year, and I think it'd be just useful bringing that out, what can be brought out of the decision that was made by council in terms of just closing the loop, in terms of this is what was sold, this is what we've acquired during the year, and the reasons for it and the process, I think would be quite helpful, which then addresses Councillor Wayne's question, which was raised at the last meeting. So it's just closing the loop. I think that's the appropriate process to do.
You're forgiven, sir. On page 51, where we've got available financial accommodation, is that any concern to us at all at the moment?
Yes, we've been monitoring that for a few months, and you're right, we need now to increase our undrawn committed facility, and we've been in discussions with LGFA regarding doubling that so that we remain within that covenant. We're going to LGFA because they've recently provided a facility, and it's a lot cheaper than what we can get from the bank, so that's why we're going to LGFA. So it's not actually drawing down a loan, it's just giving us a facility that we can use if we're in an emergency situation.
So, Mr. Clapperton, did you want to respond on the property purchase and sale disclosure?
So I'll do the first or the last bit first. So under standing orders, there's an ability for the Chief Executive to determine that matters that have been considered in committee can be released because there's no grounds to withhold that information going forward. And in this case here, regarding Rose Street, there is no need to actually hold that information in committee. The standing order states that the Chief Executive will inform the subsequent meeting of the nature of the information released. I'd like to do that today, but I actually haven't got all the details to actually do that. But with the leave of the meeting, I will happily indicate that I will be putting a summary of that information in the next FAR committee. In fact, you could probably bring it to the next council meeting if we needed to accelerate that. But there's no reason to withhold that information now that the transaction has actually proceeded.
So that's about the sale of Row, but I also think it's important that we talk about the sale, the acquisition of the properties on page 55 as well.
I'm happy to add that information.
Thank you. As well. Councillor Todd?
Yeah, this is on page, I think, Chair, on page 58, 5A, second paragraph. The overspend in the solid waste of, well, not overspend, obviously it's a spend on consultancies, which are very professional, doing a great job, but at 224k, and we are only halfway through this process because it won't be finished till November. I would just like a little bit of a surety that it's not going to be a $500,000 spend for a consultant on this, because it seems to be a lot of money to me. Councillor Todd, some of that is in fact a prior year adjustment which we should really shift below the line because it's to do with the levy, the levy we get from the government for to be spent on mitigating, I think it's a minimisation of solid waste. We get a special levy from the government, and we've got to spend it on that. So it's some of that is unspent levy, if you know what I mean, from previous years. So it's effectively a prior year adjustment, because we assumed it was all being spent, but it wasn't.
Okay, so
Yeah.
So the way I read it though is that was on the consultant, but it's not purely on the consultant, is what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Can I just request that you actually just probably provide a little bit more detail of the dollars at the next meeting? Thank you. Right, are there any other questions on the financial report? Okay, can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 47? Thank you, Councillor Christine. I'll second it. Any further discussion on the resolution? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our last item on the agenda is the committee action report on page 63. I don't think we need an officer to present that. Are there any updates, questions from the committee? I have one, and it's the top one, and it's got Mr. Law's name against it, which might have to be changed next month. Have we had any response from our good friends Audit New Zealand on the management report update?
Not a formal response, but we've had one of their officers going through each one of those line by line and talking to us about whether we've done what we said we've done and to be able to get it off the list. So they've made some progress, but they just haven't formally reported.
If I could just say that report was due in September last year, if I may be correct, maybe we should just remind them when they come to present their final one. If we're late, I think there needs to be a bit of leniency. Sorry? You'll do that? Thank you. Any other comments, requests for additional information on that update? Right. Therefore, can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 63? Thank you, Councillor Ross. Seconded, Councillor David. No further discussion on the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Being the last item of the business of the meeting, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your spirited bidding.